know for absolute certain that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin? That is a great question because obviously part of the value of Bitcoin is its scarcity. And if it could somehow go on beyond when everybody expects it to, that would negatively impact its value. So how do we know there will only be 21 million? Well, the answer to that is it is hard coded into the protocol of Bitcoin. In fact, it is the most sacrosanct aspect of Bitcoin. It is the one thing in Bitcoin that would be the hardest to change of anything because everybody on the Bitcoin network, literally all of the people who use Bitcoin, would all have to agree for that limit to be raised. And if even one person did not agree, they could continue to use a version of Bitcoin that had a 21 million coin supply cap. So the short take is it's absolutely immutable and it'll never change. But how do we know that? Well, so the math is actually pretty easy to figure out in that Bitcoin was set up where for the first 4 years that a total of 50 Bitcoins would come out every 10 minutes. And if you run the simple math on that, 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes for 4 years, that generates 50% of 21 million. It's exactly 10.5 million Bitcoin are generated that way in 4 years. In the next 4 years, the math of the actual protocol dictates that the total supply has to drop in half every 4 years. And again, if somebody tried to change that, then at the 4 year mark, where the next time a Bitcoin block was mined, it was supposed to have, for example, on April 19th, the block reward dropped from 6.25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes to 3.125, which is half as many. If the person who mined that block number 840,000, had tried to include a block reward larger than 3.125 Bitcoin, that block would have been rejected by the entire network because the official code and protocol says you have to drop that reward in half every 4 years. So what happens is the first 4 years is 50 Bitcoin, which generate 50% of the total supply. The next 4 years, which was from 2012 to 2016, was 25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And that generated 25% of the total supply. And then it went to 12 and a half, then 6.125, now 3.125, and it keeps going down. So because that math and that protocol is hard coded into Bitcoin, there's no way to change it again without everybody agreeing. The way it sort of works is this, and you can actually figure this out if you go into Chat GPT or anything and say, hey, what would happen if I gave somebody 50 ounces of gold every 10 minutes for 4 years, and then after that, it drops in half, and then it drops in half, and then it drops to half. What's the maximum amount of gold I could ever give that person? And the answer is 21 million ounces of gold. So that's just the way it works. That's the way the math works. If you drop something in half every periodically, you end up with an absolute number. Because in the first 4 years, you are always going to mine or produce or give or whatever half of the total supply. Anytime you have a math formula that drops in half every so often, then during the first period of time, you're always going to get half of the total. Meaning you can figure out what the total is going to be by multiplying the number of whatever it is times two. So in this case, Bitcoin, 10.5 million were mined in the first 4 years, which means in the entire remaining history of Bitcoin, that there will only be double that number, 10.5 million times two, 21 million. So another way to look at it is like this, right? So you got the pie of total Bitcoin. Half is in the first year, and then another 25%, and then 12 and a half, and then 6.125, and then 3.125. So you're basically filling in of the total pie of 21 million Bitcoin, you're filling in half of whatever is left every 4 years. So in the first 4 years, you have the whole pie. So you fill in half of that, 50%. And then the next 4 years, you fill in another half, which is 25%. And the next 4 years, you fill in another half, which is 12.5%. And the next 4 years, 12, whatever it is, 12.5%, then 6.25%, then 3.125, etc. It's the same way, again, to use a sort of dumb analogy. If you stood 21 feet away from someone, and every 4 minutes, let's say every 4 minutes instead of every 4 years, every 4 minutes you walk half of the way that remains to that person, then in the first 4 minutes, you'd walk from the 21-foot mark to 10.5. And then then you'd walk an additional half, and an additional half, an additional half. But as long as you're only ever walking half of the remaining space, you never actually get to the person. I mean, if you do it long enough, you get to, one atom away from the person, I suppose. But the formula for Bitcoin also stipulates that if you ever get to a number that cannot be that has to be rounded. It has to be rounded down, and that once you get to 32 halvings, basically it stops. Basically, it just goes to zero because the number of total Bitcoin at that point in the halving would be 1 Satoshi, which is the smallest unit of Bitcoin. And if you get below 1 Satoshi, even a microscopic bit less than 1 Satoshi, the math of Bitcoin dictates you have to round down. So as soon as you get the block reward is less than 1 Satoshi, it goes to zero. So anyway, so that is the way Bitcoin works. Now you're probably thinking, but wait, if the Bitcoin miners are getting these block rewards, what happens if they work extra hard to try to get those Bitcoin faster than every 10 minutes? And the answer is Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, invented a genius solution to that, and it's called the difficulty adjustment. And what that means is every 2016 blocks, which happens to be the reverse order of numerals of 6102, which is when Franklin Delano Roosevelt took away everybody's gold. When FDR took away everyone's gold, it was with Executive Order 6102. Just so happens that Bitcoin every 2016 blocks, which is the reverse of 6102-2016, every 216 blocks, which is every 2 weeks, the Bitcoin network evaluates how much total hash power, which is how much total computational power, was used during the previous 2 weeks, and it adjusts the difficulty for the next 2 weeks. And there's a limit of how it can only go down or up a certain amount, but it's constantly adjusting. So if somebody said, hey, let's all double the amount of computing power that we're throwing at the Bitcoin network and try to generate extra Bitcoin, well, first of all, you would just get closer and closer to the halving because the halving is not based on time. It's actually based on blocks. It happens every 210,000 blocks. So 210,000, 420,000, 630,000, and 840,000, which was the most recent. So all you would do if you tried to do that was you would accelerate the 21 million. You could never go past 21 million Bitcoin, but you could slightly accelerate it. But here's the problem. If everybody brings 10% more computing power online in the course of 2 weeks, which is basically impossible because the Bitcoin network is already the world's most powerful computing network. So 10% additional computing power in 2 weeks is probably metaphysically impossible. But even if it was, at the 2 week mark, the protocol is going to update universally and it's going to become 10% harder to find a block. So if you're finding them every 9 minutes, it's going to make it harder so that it takes 10 minutes. Now, if we get the reverse, for example, when China banned Bitcoin mining back in 2021, about 3.5 years ago, and they said, hey, we're just not going to have any Bitcoin mining in China, you saw a drop in the total amount of computational power. Now, it all just redistributed around the world, and it turns out a bunch of the Bitcoin hash rate still comes from China. They're just doing it sort of under the radar. But I think something like 20%, it's a pretty large percent, still comes from China, even though the communist, CCP, even though they try to stamp it out, people just do it anyway because you can't stop it. Um, but anyway, so you saw a big drop in the hash rate temporarily, but the Bitcoin protocol just adjusted and said, hey, it looks like 20 or 30 or 40% of the hash power of the network just disappeared overnight. But again, within 2 weeks, it updated and it made the computation that the computers have to run, it made it 20, 30, 40, 50% easier to find Bitcoin blocks. But again, you can never get past 21 million. So when the protocol was originally rolled out, it was set up where it was intended to take until the year 2140. So the computational power has been coming online fast enough that we will probably get to 21 million slightly faster than that. even with massive amounts of new computing power constantly coming online on the Bitcoin network, the best estimates is that all 21 million Bitcoin will be in circulation in the year 2136. Now, the year 2140 is 116 years away. The year 2136 is 112 years away. So, yes, it is possible to mine the Bitcoin slightly faster, but it is not possible to get more than 21 million. And again, you can run the math yourself. Take anything or ask ChatGPT and say, hey, if I give somebody 50 of something every for every 10 minutes for 4 years, and then it drops in half every 4 years thereafter, is it mathematically possible to end up with 21 million? And the answer is no. You just mathematically can't end up with more than 21 million. The same way, if you gave somebody one thing every 4 years, and then at the end of 4 years, you gave them half of a thing, and then after that, you gave them a quarter of a thing, and then 4 years later, you gave them an eighth of a thing, and then a 16th, and a 32nd, and a 64th, and a 128th. You can never end up with more than two things. If the first 4 years you get one thing, and then you get half of that every 4 years for the rest of eternity, you can never end up with more than two total things because you keep getting closer. You keep getting closer to 1.5, 1.75, 1.875, 1.925, or whatever it is, 9275. I don't know, whatever it is. You keep getting closer and closer and closer, but you never actually get all the way to two whole things. Same with Bitcoin. You just never get to 21 million. You're always just a bit shy, especially in the case of Bitcoin, because it always rounds down. If the number of satoshis in the mix is a number that is not an even number, it rounds down. The math always dictates in Bitcoin it rounds down. Obviously, if you're calculating any other math with Bitcoin, it rounds if it's 5 or above and down if it's below. But in the case of the halving math is set to always round down. So that is why there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. The answer is because it's a mathematical certainty that is programmed into the Bitcoin blockchain. That math can be checked by anyone at any time, day or night. It's all open source code, which means everybody on the planet is welcome to review it and eyeball it and make sure it says what they think it says. It is the most immutable part of Bitcoin, meaning of all the things that would ever change about Bitcoin, that will never change without unanimous consent of every user of Bitcoin. And I can tell you it's never going to change because I'm never going to agree to more than 21 million Bitcoin. And I don't know anybody on the planet that would ever agree to more than 21 million Bitcoin because it basically devalues, it debases your own Bitcoin. So why would you agree for there to be more than 21 million when you bought Bitcoin believing there was going to be only 21 million? And you personally have to agree for the number to go up. Otherwise, your Bitcoin won't change and they'll have introduced some new worthless coin called, Bitcoin 21 million plus that nobody wants. So anyway, so it'll never change. And the difficulty adjustment that's pre-programmed into Bitcoin to happen every 2 weeks, which is every 2016 blocks, makes sure that as the total amount of hash power on the network increases or decreases, the protocol is constantly updating, making the computers have to work harder or less hard so that on average, they always find and mine a new block about every 10 minutes. It's a genius system. It is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant genius system that guarantees with numerous checks and balances that there will never, under any circumstances, ever be more than 21 million Bitcoin. It's just brilliant. So good job to Satoshi Nakamoto and you.